when we read it, even when we don't understand it, is a lot like the chicken and the egg. Did English generate this work of this masterpiece, or did this masterpiece generate the language that we speak today? And is that why when we open up the King James Version, again, even if we don't understand all the jots and tittles and the whittles, it still hits our ears like this belongs, this fits, this is natural. The reality is it permeates our culture. It shapes so much of what we think and see and understand about religion at a level that we can't really tap into for the most part. The truth of the matter is that you can see it in moments, sometimes moments of crisis, sometimes moments of beauty. The moment of beauty I think of is when Princess Diana was buried, and the Prime Minister Tony Blair read 1 Corinthians 13 in the King James Version. And it was one of the most beautiful scripture readings I think I've ever heard. But I also remember with great clarity the recitation of Psalm 23 on September 11th, 2001. I remember it in the President's remarks that night, and I remember it in the stories of the ones who stood against the terrorists on Flight 93, how that was their prayer that they all shared. And nothing connects me more to those people than that prayer, to know that they were uttering words that I've uttered in times of crisis and in need, words that are ingrained in me since I was in my grandmother's house long years ago. I had no faith then, but I had these words that she handed to me, this legacy, and that shaped even my faith. Today, what I want to do is just try to tackle a topic that seems and is really quite huge. And I want to just take a few snapshots, look at a few things, and think about the presence of the King James, and in one sense, where it is today, who's using it, and what does it mean that it's being used. But in another sense, trying to understand how it's passed away, how it's receded, and to end by asking the question, what have we lost because we don't use the King James Version on a daily basis in our worship and in our scripture readings? Perhaps it's inevitable that we shouldn't use it, but still, it is a loss. I want to start, first of all, by thinking about where perhaps it's most successfully employed in this day and age in North America, and that is in the African American churches. This is a picture, I don't know if any of you know it, this is Tyrone Talbert. He was one of my students. He's graduated, and I did ask him for permission. I trolled Facebook. I knew there had to be a picture of Tyrone with the Bible. So I trolled Facebook and then took it, and I wrote him and asked him for permission. I'm hoping he responds with a yes. But actually, Mr. Talbert did respond, and he is serving as an assistant minister in New York. And I know in his congregation that they use the King James Version of the Bible. And in an article in Christian Century that Provost Tippins shared with me a month ago, the article's entitled, "For Many Blacks, There's Only One Bible, and it's the King James Version." And it seems to be the case that predominantly in the African American churches, this Bible holds sway. In that article, there are a couple of quotes that get at the reason why it holds sway, why it still has this resonance there, and it's still used. "It's a loftiness," says one person, "to the language that I believe appealed to people who are constantly being told, 'You don't count, you're nobody, you're at the bottom rung of the ladder.'" That's in the words of Reverend Cheryl Sanders, who's written a book about black Christians' use of the King James Version. "If I can memorize a verse of Scripture," she says, "it gives me a certain sense of dignity." Sanders said she often uses the King James Version during funerals and in visits to sick and dying members. This resonates with me. I remember a woman named Grace, who was 103, when I would go and read to her she used to go to my church, and I'd go and I'd read with her, and she could hear my voice. I have a deep voice that's really good for reading to old ladies and yelling at little children, and I would read to her from my Bible. But then at times she would recite from memory what she had memorized from the Gospel of John. And I remember listening to the King James Version without any Bible in front of her. It was there, and it was living and active.